We are gonna see another another example of how you might combine two sentences using the relative pronoun. Always the first step is to find the common element, that is the word that is repeated here. In this case, Adams won the first prize in the competition. His parents, both teachers. Now, his is the word that is repeated, was the common element. So delete it, okay, cross it out. And next step is choose the appropriate relative pronoun. The appropriate relative pronoun in this case is the pronoun whose. And always, when you choose the relative pronoun, place it next to the word or the noun it modifies in the sentence. In this case, what it modifies in the sentence is Neil Adams, whose. Next step is you copy the second sentence except for the word that we crossed out. What is the second sentence is parents are both teachers. So here you are, Neil Adams, whose parents are both teachers. Final step is to copy what is left. From the first sentence is so here you are. Yes. We also need to check if we can omit the relative pronoun. We cannot omit the relative pronoun in this case because we have a non-defining relative clause. Why is it non-defining? And why are we using the comma? Because everybody knows Neil Adams. Adams is a proper name, and with proper names, we use non-defining relative clauses. Neil Adams, comma, whose parents are both teachers, comma, won the first prize in the competition. Note that the placement of the relative clause, the relative clause is placed after the word it modifies, which is Neil Adams. It is very important to pay attention to the placement because some students do the mistake of placing the relative clause at the end, something like Neil Adams won the first prize in the competition whose parents are both teachers. That's a mistake. All right, now let us move to different relative pronouns denoting time and place. The relative, or actually they are called adverbs, relative adverbs, or because they indicate place and time. The first one is first sentence. The hotel where they were staying is the Four Seasons. Note that we can also replace where by the relative pronoun which and a preposition. In which or at which they were staying is the four. In which and at which are really very formal expressions. In spoken English, we tend to use where instead of in and at which. So this is for place, and when is used for time. The year when he was born is 1986. Note that we can also use the relative pronoun which plus the preposition in. Now, the preposition that is appropriate, in which for a year or on which for a day, or the month in which. Okay, so depending again what is the appropriate preposition, you can use at for time, you can use on for day, you can use in for year and more, right? And of course at and in which for place. So we're gonna practice these relative pronouns later. Now I would like to move to of quantifiers with relative clauses. And here we are now moving to something very tricky and very formal, because this is a very good way of combining and joining sentences with a relative pronoun whom and which. Now, the sentence here, her sons, both of whom work abroad, ring her up every week. This is the relative clause, both of whom. This relative clause was combined from two original sentences that are, her sons ring her up every week, both of them work abroad. As I told you, if you follow the steps that I gave you in the beginning of the presentation, which is try to find the word that is repeated, the common element. The common element is them, because because we have her sons and them, and then replace it by the appropriate both of whom, because whom is the appropriate relative pronoun for an object. And here in this case, the relative pronoun is the object of the preposition. You can either use whom or which. As you can see here from the title, whom is for persons and which is for things. Now, the third step, after you have chosen, replaced the appropriate relative pronoun, try now to place the relative clause next to the word it modifies in the sentence. What does it modify? It modifies sons. So we place it next to the word sons. And always please put a comma. Whenever you have quantifiers, and the relative both, most, several, all, always put a comma. You don't pay attention to whether they are defining or non-defining. Here is another example. The buses, comma, most of which were already full, comma, were surrounded by an angry crowd. You see, this comes from the two independent sentences. The buses were already full. Most of them, that is, most of the buses were surrounded by an angry crowd. Again, it is easy by following the steps. Try to find the common element. The repeated word is them. Cross it out and replace it by the appropriate relative pronoun, either which and whom. Since this we're talking about, then we're gonna replace it by which, most of which, and place this relative pronoun next to it modifies in the sentence, which is buses. The buses, comma, most of which were already full, comma, were surrounded by an angry crowd. Let's see another example. I picked up the apples, some of which were badly bruised. I picked up the apples, some of them were badly bruised. So again, we have apples here, and apples is a thing, non-living object. Another example, and here you can use also numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, because they are considered as quantifiers. The house full of boys, comma, 10 of whom were his own grandchildren. The house was full of boys, 10 of them, 10 of the boys were his own grandchildren. All right. Now, it becomes a little bit tricky here. We can also use the superlative and plus relative pronoun. The biggest of which. The fish are multicolored, the biggest of which is only 2 centimeters long. The original independent sentences are, The fish are multicolored, full stop. The biggest of the fish is only 2 centimeters. Now, the biggest is a superlative, okay? And the fish is the word that is repeated. If you follow the step, you can repeat, cross out the word fish and replace it by the relative pronoun which. All right? The fish are multicolored, the biggest of which is only 2 centimeters. Now, things will be a little bit more complex. We're going to see relative clauses with nouns. And it's pretty much the same as quantifiers and the superlative. Now, look at this sentence. Researchers, here we have researchers S, conducted an experiment, full stop. The results of the experiment show the link between loneliness and Pokemon. Loneliness, sorry, I will correct the mistakes here. There is a missing vowel here and plural. I save. All right. Let me see. Share. Okay. So here you are. All right. So the researchers conducted an experiment. The results of the experiment showed a link between loneliness and Pokemon. Now, as I told you, always follow the steps. The first step is to identify the word that is repeated. In this sentence, the word that is repeated is experiment. The results of the experiment, replace it by the appropriate relative pronoun. The appropriate relative pronoun is which. The result of which, okay? The result of which. Now, what are we talking about? What is the word that is modified in this sentence? It is experiment. So we put a comma after experiment, and we use a relative clause, the result of which show the link between loneliness and Pokemon. All right, so here we have a pretty much tricky expression with the use of noun plus of which. It is the same as quantity, most of which, all of which, both of which, etc., etc. And you can use, any other nouns like the price of which, the purpose of which, the color of which, the bottom of which, the result of which, and the extent of which. Let's see another example. Yes. Here, this is the sentence that we need to combine into a relative clause. They purchased a house. The interior of the house has been completely updated. Can someone combine these two sentences into a relative clause using a relative clause? Yes?
Can I, teacher?
Yes?
They purchased the interior of which has been completely updated.
Can you repeat? They purchased a house?
The interior of which has been.
Yes, has been completely updated. Good. That's a correct sentence. They purchased a house, the interior of which has been updated. Okay? Been completely. This is a very formal way of using relative clauses, and of course, you can also use whenever you have this construction noun plus a relative pronoun. You can also use the possessive pronoun. They purchased a house whose interior has been completely updated. Let me write it here. Let me share again. Yes. So here I'm gonna write an alternative way of using relative clauses. Instead of using the noun and the relative pronoun, we can use the relative, the possessive pronoun whose interior has been completely updated, right? Can you see it? They purchased the house whose interior has been completely updated. Actually, these are really similar. The interior of which or whose interior has been completely updated. Right. Let's now move on to a completely different type of relative clause, what we call, if you study, please have a look at this relative clause, which is disappointing. The book won't be published until next year, comma, which is disappointing. Now, what does this relative clause modify in this sentence? Does it modify year? Does it modify book? No. It modifies the whole sentence. Okay? The book won't be published until next year. This meaning the whole sentence, the fact the book will not be published until next year is disappointing. This is disappointing. So this is a very different type of relative clause, what we call a relative clause as sentence modifier. It modifies the whole sentence, okay? The fact that the book will not be published is disappointing. So with this type of sentence modifier, a relative clause as sentence modifier, we always use a comma before the relative clause. Let's have a look at another example. I have got to go to hospital on Monday. Full stop. This. I mean, the fact that I. Yes, this. Yes. Is there a question?
Teacher, sorry to interrupt you, but we still see the previous slide in which the purchased house.
This slide, this one?
We still see the previous one.
Okay. Let me see. Right. Let's see. Okay. All right. Now, do you see the slide with the relative clauses as sentence modifiers?
Yes.
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 Now,
Thank
the
you.
book won't be published until next year. Full stop. This is disappointing. Now, or refers to the content of this sentence, the proposition in this sentence. This meaning the fact that the book will not be published until next year is disappointing. This meaning what is in the previous sentence is disappointing or is frustrating. When you have this kind of construction, you can replace this or this fact by the relative pronoun which, and you put a comma before, which means that what is disappointing is what has been said before, the fact that the book will not be published until next year. Now, why do we call this a relative clause as a sentence modifier? Because it modifies the whole sentence. The fact, what is disappointing is the fact that the book will not be published until next year. Let us see another example. I have got to go to hospital on Monday. Full stop. This means I won't be able to see you. This, that is, the fact that I have got to go to hospital means. We replace this by a relative pronoun which, and we place a comma before. I have got to go to hospital on Monday, comma, which means I won't be able to see you. This is again a relative clause as a sentence modifier. It modifies the whole sentence. It doesn't modify Monday, it does not modify hospital, but it modifies the whole sentence. All right, let's see another example. Again, we have a relative clause as a sentence modifier. He passed his examination with honors, comma, which made his parents very proud of him. The professor came home drunk the other night, which shocked the whole neighborhood. Both these sentences have a relative clause that modifies the whole sentence, the previous sentence, which made his parents very proud. What is it that made his parents very proud? The fact that he succeeded in the examination with honors, okay? So this is a sentence, relative clause, a sentence modifier, and we place before. The professor came home drunk the other night, comma, which shocked. The fact that he came home drunk the other night shocked the whole neighborhood. Okay, now time for some practice. I have here two sentences with a quantifier, okay? Let's combine these two sentences into one sentence using clause. Who would like to do this sentence?
Teacher.
Yeah. Yes, please.
The car crashed into a queue of people, 4 of which were killed.
4 of which?
Whom?
Which or whom?
Whom.
Okay, whom.
Yes.
The reason is that whom is, of course, for persons. Right?
Yes.
And where are we going to put 4 of whom? Here, after the car, after crashed, after queue, or after people?
After people.
Why?
Because it refers to people.
Good. So that's correct. The car crashed into a queue of people, comma, 4 of whom were killed, 4 of whom modifies people, and so we place it next to the word it modifies, and we always put a comma because we have a quantifier for of whom. Okay, more practice. Who would like to do this sentence? Try to combine the two independent clauses using a relative clause, 2 sentences using a relative clause, one of them. All right, they 4 very bad tires, one of them before I had driven 4 miles.
tires.
Yes.
They gave me 4 very bad tires, one of which burst before I had driven 4 miles.
Good. They gave me 4 very bad tires, one of which, because which is a thing and tire is a thing, all right?
Yes.
And one of which, right? So you always use the steps. Try to find the word that is repeated, which is them. Replace it by the appropriate pronoun and put it next to the word it modifies in the sentence, which is tire, and put a comma before. All right. More practice. Again, 2 sentences should be combined into one using a relative pronoun. And here we have the quantifier 3/4. It is 3/4. It's actually the quantifier 3 and the noun quarters of the apples. Okay, who would like to try it? Difficult? Is
Teacher,
this, yes, please, go ahead.
I bought a load of apples, 3/4 of which were bad.
Good. I bought a load of apples, comma, 3/4 of which were bad. All right? 3/4 of which. You know, you can use 1/4 of which, you can use half of which, you can use the majority of which were bad, most of which were bad. So any quantifier, you use any quantifier after apples to modify what is the quantity of apples that were bad. Is it 1 which was bad, 1 of which were bad, 2 of which, or most of which were bad, 1/4 of which, half of which were bad? Okay, so any quantifier. Right. Here is another example, to another practice example. Thousands of people had come to Dallas to see the president, full stop. None of these people, none of these people, or none of them realized what was about to happen. Okay, who would like to try it?
Teacher,
Yes, go ahead.
thousands of people had come to Dallas to see the president, none of whom realized what was about to happen.
All right. This is it's not correct. I'm gonna show you why. I'm gonna show you why it is not correct. Where is the share? Okay, so what you said is thousands of people had come to see the president, none of whom. The mistake that you did is that you placed the relative pronoun after the president. This is what you did. As I told you, always place the relative pronoun next to the word it modifies. The word it modifies is people, not president. You cannot place this relative pronoun next to president. All right.
Really? Yes.
First step is you know, you have to follow these steps systematically. First step is identify the word that is repeated, which is these people. Replace it by the relative pronoun, which is whom. And then, very important step, very critical, is to place the relative clause next to the word it modifies. What is the word it modifies? It's not the president, it's people. So thousands of people, comma, none of whom realized what was to happen, comma, had come to Dallas to see the president. Okay? The last step is very important, is the placement of your relative clause, the placement. Always place it next to the word it modifies. Okay, people. It's not president. It's thousands of people, none of whom realized. None of the people, not none of the president. If it were president, then we place it after president. And since here we are referring to people, we should place it next. Okay, let's see another example. These are two independent sentences that we need to combine. It is easy to get lost when traveling through Cairo. Full stop. This is why it is a good idea to learn some Arabic. Who would like to try to combine? Yes, please, go ahead.
It is easy to get lost when traveling through Cairo, which is why it is a good idea to learn some Arabic.
Why have you used the relative pronoun which?
Because we have this that modify the all sentence. It is easy to get lost.
Good. How about punctuation? Do we need a comma?
To put a comma after Cairo.
All right, that's it. Correct. It's easy to get lost when traveling through Cairo, comma, which is why it's a good idea. This is a relative clause as sentence modifier. It modifies the whole sentence. All right. Let's move on to another example. Taxi drivers in Cairo usually know where they're going. This means that you should at least learn Arabic numbers. I would try to combine these two sentences into one. Yes?
Teacher?
Yeah.
Taxi drivers in Cairo usually know where they are going, comma, which means that you should at least learn Arabic numbers.
Right, good, correct. Do you see the slide? Yes. This is again a relative clause as sentence modifier.